welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast and very best wishes for 2019. I'm Michelle Marius, your host and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. Following from our earlier conversation in episode 33 with Gabriel Abed of the fintech firm BIT, we are continuing our exploration of blockchain, cryptocurrency, and the digital currency space in the Caribbean, but now focusing on the government/policy side. We are thrilled to have Michelle Doyle-Lowe, the acting deputy governor of the Central Bank of Barbados, to help us understand the central bank's interest in blockchain and the wider fintech scene in Barbados, and what the bank hopes will be achieved, the anticipated digital Barbados dollar, what the recently established regulatory sandbox is supposed to do, and the role fintech is expected to play in Barbados' longer-term development. Enjoy. Mrs. Lowe, welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast.
Thank you, Michelle, and it's certainly a pleasure to join you.
So just to start us off and to probably just help everybody understand, can you give us a brief sense of what a central bank does?
Well, we at the Central Bank of Barbados, because we operate in a small open economy, we have differing core functions. So the primary ones are in terms of maintaining monetary and financial stability and soundness. So in most of our documentation, as well as our economic reviews, you will see mention of those efforts and what we think will promote stability. We are also the issuer of our legal tender and currency, as well as the provider for foreign currency as required in the system. And equally as important, we promote the development of our money and capital market. And part of that initiative also feeds the overall economic development of the economy, and particularly in terms of the payment system and how that structure needs to support economic activity and development. So we actually administer our payment system here in Barbados.
Understood. And I've noted that in recent months, it seems as if the bank is becoming quite interested in blockchain and the wider fintech scene. Why is that?
Well, as a strategic focus, we do recognize that financial solutions, fintech, the evolution of payments will involve changes in the way we do business, the way consumers want to be able to access 24/7 payment services, and ultimately to have greater convenience, efficiency, and lower costs built around their financial transactions. So as such, we as regulator want to better understand these types of initiatives, how we can facilitate these developments within our market, as well as what we need to contemplate by way of regulation to ensure that we deliver on our public policy initiatives to ensure that financial stability is maintained, that the privacy of consumers is protected, as well as any cybersecurity issues, and that ultimately we maintain the requirements in terms of anti-money laundering efforts and initiatives that need to be supported by way of any new initiatives being undertaken in the financial sector, so that we know that we're proceeding in a safe manner to facilitate and innovate within the financial space.
So is there any particular areas in the fintech space that the bank is particularly keen to see develop?
Well, I think straight off payments is the primary one for us here at the Central Bank, which is why we partnered with the other regulator in our market, the Financial Services Commission, so that we can better understand the level of innovation happening within payments, how it can fit with the existing payment infrastructure in terms of the interoperability across the system, so that there is a smooth facilitation of transactions, and also that we better understand what may be happening in payments versus how fintech is being applied with regard to investments or securities by way of coin offerings. So the initiative that we have undertaken with the FSC in the form of the regulatory sandbox allows us to zone in on payments, but at the same time take stock of what else is happening in the market.
Okay, so you mentioned a regulatory sandbox, but can you give us a sense as to what that is supposed to do?
Sure. So the regulatory sandbox is really a mechanism for us to respond to the change that we're seeing in the market in a dynamic way, where we set up a space to observe companies that are offering new financial solutions, observe and test so that there is some level of reporting coming to us as regulator, and where we learn from the process because we can better understand the operational issues, any risk exposures, how they are embedding the AML requirements that we apply to other licensed financial institutions. And at the same time, it allows the entity to learn what is required from the regulator. So it's a win-win in terms of a testing environment where we share and explore, but at the same time, the focus of it is in order to build regulatory clarity. So it allows us to then come to some conclusion as to whether the entity or the product offering should conform with existing regulatory requirements and guidelines, or whether we need to consider something different based on the product offering, based on what is being presented for public consumption. So it allows us to examine, to test for the purpose of creating regulatory clarity at the end of the day.
And just to be clear, you mentioned AML. Is that anti-money laundering?
Correct. So as for any other sound financial jurisdiction, we're expected to comply with anti-money laundering requirements, with what is termed CFTA requirements, where you're ensuring that you're collecting sufficient information on your customers to basically track or detect any level of fraudulent or illicit activity that may be linked to terrorism or any other criminal activity. And that means that your reporting structures, your systems, your authorizations for onboarding new customers has to be geared towards that type of structure. And that is important for us in terms of maintaining the integrity of our financial system. And as such, is important to understand what is being embedded in any new system that is being rolled out to the public, where we want to ensure as the regulator that we are in compliance with those types of requirements based on what we review for respective systems.
Understood. And with respect to the sandbox, I gather it should run for a specific period of time. Is there any time frame that has already been established?
Well, when we initially launched the sandbox, soon thereafter, we received our first applicant to the sandbox, which is BIT, Barbados. Mm-hmm. And you're right that the sandbox is for a set period where we have particular objectives. So similarly, for this particular sandbox, it is set for a time period. And over that time period, there is weekly reporting and discussion for the purpose of understanding the exposure for customers, as well as what efforts to mitigate any risks have been undertaken. ultimately the sandbox is targeted at new technologies or new product offerings where we want to be sure that the customer protection concerns are being adequately addressed and there is no potential risk to the financial system. And that's why we have a set testing window to basically establish those key elements.
And how long is the testing window?
In this particular instance with BIT, we're looking at an 8-week window. For other companies, it will differ depending on what product they're looking at offering, the level of testing that they may have done before. So whether they have done stress testing to understand the rigor of the system, whether they have internal reporting structures that meet our criteria. So depending on those factors, the testing window and the time frame for the sandbox will differ.
Okay, because I wondered whether or not it was a sandbox in terms of the framework, whereby the actual framework itself would be existing for a fixed period. But I gather from what you're saying that the sandbox is around each entity.
Correct.
Itself?
Yes,
Okay.
you're correct. And quite honestly, there are some sandbox around the world that have been structured the way you're referencing, where there's a set cohort of a 6-month period or a 4-month period where applicants must come in at those set times. But because we wanted to ensure that we afford some level of flexibility, given that this is new to us as well as players in the market, we opted to use a different structure where we would allow entities to come in once they have met the criteria and once we have a sense as to what testing period we really need depending on how developed a product solution they are offering.
Okay. So essentially also it then means that perhaps that once any entity is coming to enter that sector in terms of fintech and would fall under the regulatory sandbox provision, it will be established around them. So it will almost be like a precursor for them to have full and unfettered operation in the market.
Yes. And the reality is that you could also have an entity entering into the sandbox framework where they may be licensed in one particular area within the financial market, but they're looking at offering a new product that is based on unproven technology, that is something completely new. And then we basically just allow them to enter based on that new product offering. So it means that we have to be a bit agile and flexible in terms of how we structure the sandbox initiative for individual entities.
Understood. And I guess how long would it take? I mean, generally speaking, as much as maybe one has only had one entity that is now sandboxed, how long would it generally take for an entity that perhaps submits an application, whether I guess to the central bank or the FSC, to say that it's looking to offer this service and would like to operate and recognizes that it needs to be in the sandbox? How long would it take for a decision to be made typically?
Well, as it stands right now, the process is relatively straightforward in terms of the submission of an application form, the confidential statement that is required, and the related fee structure. So that part in itself, in terms of acceptance into the sandbox, is not a lengthy process. Because as I mentioned, soon after we launched, we were able to accept BIT into the framework. And since then, we have gotten queries and interest from other entities that are similarly hoping to enter. What we anticipate will probably require some level of extension once entities are in the sandbox is to ensure that they have met all the requirements. The first applicant that we received in the form of BIT, because they have gotten to a certain stage of development, their time period could be shortened. But other entities that are new startups that are now trying to test a product offering, we anticipate that we may have to do some extension in terms of their time period within the sandbox, depending on how they're resourcing their initiative and how they are sort of protecting their customers and looking to build in certain reporting structures within their framework.
Understood. Well, certainly BIT is a Barbadian company, and so I would assume that one of the requirements might be that the company has some sort of legal standing, or the applicant, has some sort of legal standing in Barbados. How does one see the sandbox and that arrangement working for entities that might want to consider coming to Barbados to offer service who may not have done business in Barbados before?
Well, ultimately, the entity will need to be a registered company here in Barbados, which again is not a complicated process depending on whether the entity wants to be a local company or an international business company. There are various options that they can pursue in terms of the registration of the company. Mm-hmm. What is important similarly is that there is clarity around the regulatory requirements and guidelines that company may need to follow. So, for example, if it is a company that is interested in operating in the investment space, which would then fall to the Financial Services Commission, that company needs to know under what act they will fall and what the requirements for their operation would be, versus if they are likely to register to be what we called a non-bank or any other type of financial institution, what is to be required of them. And that is the part that we are hoping to build on in terms of this regulatory sandbox initiative.
All right, so let me just pivot a little bit, because I am aware that there are plans for Barbados to create a digital currency. Is that correct?
Well, we are at the point of exploring, as most other central banks are doing, the benefits and the issues that may need to be managed by way of us moving to a form of digital Barbados currency. And we're at the exploration phase of this, because what is important, as with any other significant change in the financial market, we need to be sure that what we contemplate is a good fit for our financial system. As you well know, we manage a fixed exchange rate environment. So we would want to better understand what would be the implication in terms of cross-border movements of a digital Barbados dollar, what it means for our existing foreign exchange control requirements, what it implies in terms of monetary transmission in such a small economy such as ours, and where we have a small banking sector with 5 entities, what does it really imply in terms of the size and volume of bank deposits, of interest rates. So these are all issues that we are exploring in terms of implication. What we do see is benefit by way of opportunity for better facilitation of financial transactions more efficiently, and where it presents a means for basic structures such as, let's say, payments related to government and you receiving or making tax payments, where all of those types of transactions can be better streamlined once you're dealing with some form of digital settlement. But at the same time, we want to be sure that migrating to a digital Barbados dollar will gain us all of the efficiency while we have a means to mitigate some of the related risks of doing so. So we're still in exploration mode where we're trying to pin down how best to leverage the opportunities And I know certainly persons that are deep into fintech would say that this is the natural evolution because you need something that will better facilitate smart contracts that are built around certain activity down the line. So these are the issues that we are strategically looking at to determine how to proceed.
And is there a timeline by which one might expect to be in a position to make a decision?
I know certainly from the point of view of the central bank, we are looking to finalize most of the technical work in terms of researching the issue next year. But I cannot pin down a particular time period by which we would actually issue any form of digital Barbados currency, because some of these things still need to be explored, even by way of how we will distribute that digital currency and what the role of current players in the market in terms of commercial banks will be. Whether, for example, we will use a retail type structure where select entities will have accounts here at the central bank for the distribution of that digital currency, or whether it will be a wholesale structure, similar to what we now use for physical cash. So because of the different elements in terms of what has to be explored, I can't straight off commit to a time frame, but we have scheduled it for next year. So you will be hearing more from us on it.
Understood. And is there a sense, though, that it would not necessarily be that, as much as there certainly would be challenges that need to be managed, that going to or creating a digital currency would be inevitable for all intents and purposes, whereby I'm just wondering whether or not at this point there is a sense as to whether or not such an initiative would be abandoned? Or will it be something that, of course, the central bank might most likely be prepared to create, but clearly trying to figure out how best to manage the benefits versus the challenges and risks?
Right. I think what's clear is that we know there must be another step in terms of the digital evolution. And I say that broadly in terms of how we endeavor to facilitate payments, how we endeavor to make currency available, how we as a people trust in terms of digital payment solutions. So what is agreed is that we know we need to take many more steps in terms of getting to the level of efficiency that we need to. And it is part of a learning cycle, if you will, as to what the specific solution will be and which company we may partner with to do that. That is what is unclear, because we still need to do some of the groundwork that is required to ensure that we adopt an approach that limits the opportunity for cyber related threats, and at the same time that we do so in a way where we improve the digital identity of persons that will be participating in the payment system, and that we protect the data and privacy of all related entities. So there are certain tenets that we know must be met, and we know the direction that we're going in. But what I'm saying is that we cannot definitively say it will be via this means versus that, because that is still work in progress.
Absolutely. So actually, some of the points that you made leads me to another set of questions. And it is about how does the whole fintech initiative, at least from the bank's perspective, promote or is aligned with the wider national development plans for Barbados? You spoke about digital identity, data protection, and I think there are going to be a whole host of other issues that would need to be developed to facilitate, a more cohesive and holistic environment.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. So this initiative that I'm referencing by way of the regulatory sandbox and some of the related work that is being done is really for us to embrace innovation and to do so in an efficient manner. At the end of the day, it forms part of our broader effort to better facilitate not only payment efficiency in the domestic market, but also business facilitation so that we move away from these concepts of payment and settlement being 3 days after a transaction has taken place, because it really does not lend itself to the most efficient way of doing business. Mm-hmm. So this is part of our business facilitation initiative. And ultimately, it opens up the avenues in terms of new investment, as well as us taking advantage of what is being offered on a global scale by way of new technology to enhance our market infrastructure and to present Barbados as a place for doing business in an efficient way and where you have the convenience of easy payment and settlement in a safe environment. So it allows us to reposition our focus in terms of investment, in terms of doing business, and in terms of having a financial system that is not only regulated soundly, but that is efficient to appeal to any party wanting to operate in this space and to do business. And I would say to you, as you well know, Barbados recently signed an extended fund facility with the IMF, which has various structural and performance benchmarks, and having a regulatory approach with regard to financial innovation in order to better facilitate business and improve our prospect for economic growth is one of the tenets of that program, because we see ourselves as creating transformation around how we do business to better innovate within the market and to lead to a better growth performance.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think I'm winding down to my last set of questions.
Okay.
Looking to 2019, I guess, what can we expect in Barbados' fintech space? Are there any specific programs or milestones that we should be on the lookout for?
Well, I would say straight off that you will be hearing from us in terms of the conclusions from our first sandbox applicant. Mm-hmm. So there will be a summary report in terms of what we have engaged and observed with regard to the work that we're doing with BIT. Similarly, so we are looking at other entities that have indicated interest, so that for us, we want to be able to build trust around what is actually being offered in the market, because that speaks to the integrity within our space. So getting input from the regulators would be one key aspect of what we're intending for 2019. And then secondly, it would be some conclusion in terms of the work with regard to how we see the landscape changing going forward, how we can better build connectivity within the system. So having some level of payments oversight and how the existing players operate with newer players coming into the market would be another key area for further development for us. And of course, as we were touching on before, how we see the prospect for central bank issued digital currency would be another area where you will hear more from us in terms of our insights. And that sort of aligns with where the International Monetary Fund is also going with regard to presenting a means for the exploration of digital currency. So those are the key elements that you're likely to hear about with regard to our work in 2019.
Understood. And I think my last question, it might seem a little mischievous, but how do you see the central bank evolving, especially in light of the whole fintech attention?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the recent evolutions in terms of payments and digital currency has brought to the forefront the role of central banks broadly. So here it is, you have a series of digital tokens under different names, but where they're privately issued versus what we have all grown accustomed to in the form of legal tender that is issued by the respective central bank. And this has meant that central banks have had to sort of step back and look at this evolution towards a cashless society, towards how we implement policy, whether it be monetary policy or financial policy related to how entities operate. And the good thing is that it means that more so central banks are thinking about the relevance of a central bank in the new dispensation that we're moving towards. The element of how we fortify our financial systems is still primary. So what do you really rely on a central bank to do by way of giving comfort that when you go to a financial institution, you can retrieve whatever funds you have placed with that entity, whether it be in digital form or otherwise. So I think those public policy elements will remain relevant for a central bank. And what we need to do right now is to think about how can central banks operate in the digital age to fulfill those types of mandates and requirements from the public, and doing so in a way where we innovate, but innovate in a way that does not undermine the credibility and the stability of our system. So it presents a shift in terms of how we do business, but the tenets and the mandate is still there. It's just that we need to be more creative in how we deliver on those aspects.
Excellent. Mrs. Lowe, thank you so much. This has been quite enlightening, and I am looking forward to hearing more about how the sandbox operates and some of the findings that come out of those projects that are bold enough to participate, along with the other findings with respect to digital currency, because I do think that for many of our Caribbean countries, it really is something that they may need to do, certainly to help to deal with some of the challenges in terms of settlements and so on. I think it would be good to probably hear back from you probably later in the year about, what has happened and where Barbados is going as it relates to leading in the fintech space.
No, this has been a pleasure for me, because oftentimes some persons view central banking as being relatively not boring, but sort of run of the mill, and therefore there is not much that, for lack of a better word, would seem sexy and creative to persons. But because of the opportunities presented and challenges to some extent with regard to the recent fintech innovation, this is a very dynamic area for us now. So it means that we have to put more effort into determining how to reposition, how to revisit even our regulatory structures. So it means that there's a lot of change happening over a set period. So I would welcome the opportunity for us to engage a bit further, and for us to provide you with an update in terms of what we have observed and how we intend to move forward, because there is so much happening in this space right now, and new findings and material coming out that we ourselves are still availing ourselves of. So definitely we should speak again later in 2019.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com, or drop us a note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ICTPulse, or via Twitter @ICTPulse. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.